Joining me to talk about this issue, because I think you heard the president say, we don't need your lumber, we don't need your oil and gas, and we don't need your cars, an important part of our relationship with the Americans. So joining me to talk about that is Vlavio Volpe. He is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Welcome to the program, Vlavio.
Thanks for having me on, and great to talk to you again, Deb.
You too. So we don't need their cars. They make a ton of them, but we don't need them. We can make them right here. What's your reaction to that?
I've seen this movie before. He said that in Trump 1.0 when we were heading into tough NAFTA renegotiations. Our cars, their cars, there are no Canadian car companies. Half of the cars made in this country, the 2 million that we would make in a typical year, are American cars. General Motors, Ford, Dodge, Chrysler branded cars. And 50% of all the parts that go into all the cars, including the Toyotas and the Hondas that are made here, come from U.S. factories, and about 55% of the raw materials come from places like Pittsburgh for steel and Texas for resins. So he knows we're intertwined. He knows how deeply integrated we are, that if you hit Ontario, you hit Michigan immediately. Governor Gretchen Whitmer said that last week when she met with Francois-Philippe Champagne, the Canadian industry minister. I think we all have to, take a deep breath and listen to his tone. And I think he's serious about extracting some type of economic concessions from us. But to not get too caught up in the rhetoric. I mean, I remember in Trump 1.0, he said, Texas Senator Ted Cruz's father killed JFK, and we didn't all go investigate that. We know that he's a agent of chaos, and we've got to approach this tactically.
I've spoken to you before, Vlavio. I've spoken to the mayor of Windsor and talked about the sort of the back and forth in making just a single vehicle. Comes one way, goes the other way, crosses the border numerous times. Is there even a way over the longer term to decouple that relationship when it comes to making cars at all?
Not without immediately harming permanently the car makers that are invested here and the 156 Canadian-owned auto part manufacturing plants in the U.S. And I'll tell you why. You turn around and you say, okay, look, tomorrow I want General Motors to stop making pickup trucks in Oshawa, and I want them to make them in Michigan. Well, there is a real inflexibility of that being tomorrow. They'd have to build a plant in Michigan. We know how long that takes and how much that costs. Let's call that 3 years and $1.5 billion of cost. You'd have to close the one in Oshawa here. You'd have to cut all the supply agreements and the costs of cutting those supply agreements, which include hurting all those American parts and material suppliers that currently have a deal here. You'd have closing costs on the facility. Let's say that costs General Motors on one plant $2.5 billion. And a few years of interrupted sales and production. And let's say, we've got 9 car plants here from all the automakers. If they all did that, they'd all have to book tens of $billions of losses to accede to the whim of the President of the United States while they fight the Chinese, while they are all publicly traded, while their market cap takes a hit, while their shareholders take a hit. Why would you cripple the prospects of American manufacturers at a time when you're also targeting the Chinese? There is no such thing as a Canadian automotive sector. We are the North American automotive sector, and some of the assets are on this side of the Detroit River. And I expect that some of the voices that are going to be useful are the same ones that were during the NAFTA renegotiations. The big American companies, Dana, Goodyear, Lear, Federal Mogul, the companies that nobody who buys a car knows, but major components come from those companies. And then Canadian companies like Linamar, Martinrea, Magna, Woodbridge, they have dozens of plants and tens of thousands of employees in the U.S. And to their Congress congressional reps to their senators to their governors. They're American investors and American employers. It's much more complicated than a post on Truth Social. It's much more complicated than going to the World Economic Forum and flexing your muscles like you're the king of the world. You're really, really, really going to hurt American manufacturing if you take aim at Canada.
Vlavio, I just have a minute left with you, but I did want to ask you about some of the EV changes, the executive orders that he signed. Their position had been 50%, new cars EV cars being sold by 2030. If he, in fact, undoes all of that very quickly, what's the impact here?
Well, I said, even when Canada matched those, I said, we're never going to make them. I don't know why we have these targets, and we're going to have to claw back from them anyway. The fact is that the new world is based on electrons, not combustion. And we've transitioned our auto sector here, and a lot of their auto sector is doing it at the same time. We're competing against the Chinese. AI is the new space. Machine learning requires lots and lots of energy. That can't happen with internal combustion. The world is moving there. He's only going to hurt American interests in the short term if we ignore that the Chinese have beat us and they're 5 years ahead. If we give them another 5 years head start together, we've lost it all.
Vlavio Volpe, President of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, thanks so much for joining me